biased
Okay.
and seeing the positive, the challenge, the opportunity, and the good side in every situation, reframing a situation to see the good that's there, to see the good that's in others. We also talked about last week about optimism and looking forward to, hoping for, and expecting good results and the power that that has to actually bring about good results. We go a big step forward and we talk not only about positivity and a good book, not only about keeping a smile on our face, but about outright joy and happiness. Not just optimism, but actual happiness and joy and that kind of uplifted feeling. And happiness, I mean, happiness and joy now, not just when the good news that we look for arrives, but even before it does. The problem is that the name of this class is actually Oi or Joy. Oi, of course, being the Oi that has always been said in Yiddish, Oi vey, or as Ochun vey, for a problem and for service and for a challenge. And sometimes we feel more like Oi than joy. How do we go from Oi to joy? How do we, in a situation which would naturally make us feel the Oi and the challenge and the pain and the suffering, how do we end up feeling the joy? So, as usual, we start with a story. And this story is of Eli Wiesel. So, of course, this is a story of the greatest Oi in our history, the greatest suffering and bitter challenge and bitter tragedy of our history, which is, of course, the Holocaust. Now, Eli Wiesel is obviously a very famous individual. What's less famous is how close of a relationship he had with Lubavitcher Rebbe. It's actually, there are some clips of him talking about this unique relationship, and there are some interesting things, especially the Rebbe encouraged him to get married. He originally, in the beginning of the years after the Holocaust, felt too embittered to consider marriage. He didn't want to bring children and start a new family in the world in which he had suffered the night of his book. Ultimately, the Rebbe did inspire him to rebuild and to get married and move forward, and actually even sent him flowers to his wedding in Jerusalem. As Eli Wiesel once said, the Rebbe has a very deep place in his heart, a very special place in his life. So, of course, this was a unique relationship, and a relationship that pertained very much to the challenges that Eli Wiesel went through. And he talks about his first private audience, what Hasidim call Yechidus, his first private meeting with the Rebbe, when he first had a chance for real conversation with the Rebbe, which ended up going, most remarkably so, most of that night. And the Rebbe had essentially asked him why he came, what it was that he was looking for in coming to see the Rebbe. And he originally said that he wasn't looking for anything in particular. But finally, as the conversation went on, he confessed to the Rebbe, and he says, "You asked me what I expect of you. And I said, I expect nothing. I was wrong. I want you to make me cry." He expressed to the Rebbe, however, since the death of his father, he writes in his book during the war, he could no longer cry. He was so bitter, he was lethargic, and he couldn't even express himself in the tears that may have been spiritual. He could no longer move, he was immobilized, and even immobilized emotionally. And he was asking the Rebbe essentially to help him cry, to help him feel the emotion that he should be able to feel, and that would hopefully help him. But the Rebbe would not suffice with that. And the Rebbe said, that's not enough to make him be able to cry. I'm not going to teach you how to cry. I will teach you how to sing. And of course, he did learn to sing, and sing he did quite literally um, as his life went on, and his writing and his poetry and his songs went on. So this is an incredibly positive approach. The Rebbe refused to let our response to a challenge, including and especially the greatest challenge or the greatest suffering, which was the Holocaust, the Rebbe refused to let our response be the oi and the pain and the suffering. The Rebbe refused to let it stop there, even though, of course, we need to feel that pain. We need to cry those tears. And not being able to is an emotional block that we need to overcome. But the Rebbe refused to stop at that point and wanted us to grow to joy, to celebration, to rebuilding, to a better future. And this is maybe best expressed by an initiative that some Jewish organizations once came up with to remember the 6 million who were lost. They said at every Seder table on Passover night, at every Seder as the Jews get together, we should leave one empty chair to remember those who cannot come to the Seder, to the 6 million of our brethren who we lost. The Rebbe, hearing of this, said, no, if you want to remember and you want to honor the 6 million we lost, if you want to celebrate the Jewish life and the Jewish hope and the Jewish future, don't keep an empty chair, fill that chair. On that chair, bring in another Jew who otherwise would not have a place to observe the Seder. On that chair, host a fellow Jew who might not yet be aware of the Passover Seder. Don't keep the chair empty. In other words, don't remain by the bitterness and the pain and the tears and the suffering, but have that drive you and motivate you to the joy and celebration, to the growth of inviting another Jew in, of expansion, of being more people involved, more sharing, more caring, more growth. And that's obviously Rebbe's positive response to the most negative situation. But the Rebbe took this much, much further than that, but actually believing in the power of joy to motivate people, to inspire people, to help us overcome challenge, and even change our responses as we should. So we're going to look at a clip of the Rebbe, where the Rebbe expresses tremendous joy, and we'll see some dramatic joy and what this teaches us and really what the story behind it is. So let us begin. I'm going to try to bring up this little video clip here. Here we go. course, we see here, this is the kosher bracha distribution of the wine, when the Rebbe would give a little bit of the wine on which he had made the blessing to everybody everybody present. And it was a very joyous celebration, but not unique in the sense that the Rebbe held such joyous celebrations all the time. There wasn't always a fellow singing in Russian, but you would often see, as the Rebbe did in this little clip, the Rebbe encouraging the singing faster, faster, stronger, stronger, and building up this joy. And what you actually hear towards the end of the clip is where people begin to whistle. And whistling, and not just singing and clapping and jumping up and down, but actually whistling along with this joy. And the whistling itself really is a story in and of itself. And probably the best way to explain this story and to get the spirit of the joy hiding behind that kind of whistling, we'll get from the one who was usually, let's say, the chief whistler, the fellow who was actually whistling much of the time at the Rebbe's gatherings, at the Rebbe's Farbrengens. We'll see him describe in his own words the first time that the Rebbe asked him to whistle. So here you see Rabbi Dr. Meir Mikkel Abachatzira. On the feast of Purim, I attended a Chabad gathering, a Hasidic gathering at Lubavitcher Rebbe. We were several thousand strong, all singing and clapping. Suddenly, without warning, the Rebbe turned my way and looked me straight in the eyes. He placed 2 fingers against his mouth and nodded in my direction several times. I could not understand what he meant. The thought crossed my mind that he might have commanded me to whistle, but I dismissed it. Never would a man of his nobility ask for something so ludicrous. I looked over my shoulders to be sure there was not someone else he was addressing, only to find that the people behind me were all looking at me. I placed 2 fingers over my mouth and waited. The Rebbe's face lit up. That was it. I entered an unknown dimension as I blew my first whistle. Others soon joined until we were hundreds whistling. The air caught fire with the resonance of the piercing sounds. My lower lip ached from blisters, but the Rebbe would not let me pause. He was taking the matter quite seriously. He called for still more energy as I, in my abruptly unbound imagination, envisioned thick, threatening black clouds shattering into dust. We discomfited darkness with our collective breath. Minds were swept clean of any and all indoctrination. Every sweet seduction murmured from the other side was blown away by the stiff wind we had summoned. Fallacious arguments flew away like frightened bats. As we toned the walls of our hearts to prepare for an all-out war fairly fought, wind against wind, challenging those irrational emotions that pose as thought, but whose essence is only wind. We alienated every gaseous enemy and incurred no casualties. Not even the singers hurt their throats as they sang background to our breath. Our final blast took off like the plaintive call of a ram's horn, a rehearsal for redemption. So obviously he's getting a bit poetic and dramatic in his description, but he's trying to describe the energy that he felt and the uplifting joy in whistling at the Rebbe's gathering, with the Rebbe spurring him on and spurring on the singing in the room as a whole. Now, not everybody was so happy about this, to say the least. And I believe it was in 1976, a photo of the Rebbe putting the 2 fingers in his mouth and encouraging the whistling was published in a Jewish newspaper. And a lot of negative feedback came from a lot of other rabbis who didn't feel this was appropriate. So much so that the Rebbe addressed this at a further gathering. And this is where you really see the Rebbe's thinking. Behind all this drama that we saw in the video clip, and behind all this whistling and this energetic joy and dancing, what is this supposed to do? Well, the Rebbe explained it. When it is a matter of increasing joy, the Jew's desire and joy in performing a mitzvah, even if there's only a slight chance that one person present will have a geula, a redemption from his yetzer hara, which means the negative side of the human being, that it is a mitzvah to whistle, to arouse their soul to divine service, even if it's only a remote possibility. Even more so, we actually see that in certain instances, there are Jews who, through such whistling, experience a fundamental change in their spiritual expression from one extreme to the other. In our situation, when the whistling was going on, there were Jews present who resolved that from this very moment they would have an increased enthusiasm in the fulfillment of practical mitzvot. In such a case, Maimonides rules that you need to behave exactly as King David did, dancing and prancing with all one's might, especially when the whistling was not a mistake, but a deliberate plan that actually worked to arouse and reveal the good hidden in a number of Jews. Through this whistling, we shall soon know the fulfillment of the promise. On that day, God will whistle and gather the Jewish people from the ends of the earth. When God whistles, it's the whistling of indicating the Jewish people to return to Israel. And you will be gathered one by one in a way that no Jew will remain in exile. May this happen with kindness and mercy, and soon. So the Rebbe saw the joy as power, the joy as a motivator, the joy as energy, the spirit of all that celebration and energy they summoned up, and all that whistling and drama would help the people present and would help us as we recount it, find the hidden good and the hidden positivity and the hidden energy within ourselves and overcome our negativity, overcome the challenges in our own life, and be able to move forward in a greater, happier, and more positive way. So the Rebbe is seeing joy as a powerful motivation and as a powerful empowerment for doing good. And of course, we know that Hasidic Jews and Hasidic Rebbes are known for hundreds of years for the joy, for the celebration, for the dancing. And this is an important part of Hasidism, where this celebration and joy animates and energizes our dedication to God and to all that's positive. But actually, we of course have to go a step further than that. There's many stories in the Hasidic tradition that indicate the power of joy to change the facts on the ground, the power of our happiness and our positive energy and actually our celebration and joy to bring about positive change in this world. In one such story, a rather dramatic one, the second Rebbe, so we're talking early 19th century, the second Rebbe actually had a choir and performers of sorts. They were known as the Rebbe's Kapella, which would be Russian for an ensemble, a choir, and they would perform on special occasions and rev up all the joy. But everybody was surprised why on some random regular day, the Rebbe suddenly instructed that the choir should perform joyously and dance and celebrate. And the Rebbe himself watched from the window as all this was going on outside. Well, in the process, the Rebbe's son fell at a terrible fall and accident in which he seemed to be in a very critical condition. And when they came and reported this to the second Rebbe, he didn't seem all too concerned, and he actually instructed that the party should go on and they should continue celebrating, dancing, and singing, which of course shocked everyone. A little while later, after the doctor had examined him, etc., it turned out that the child was not in critical condition. He had broken a leg, but thank God, no more. And of course, the celebration, as the Rebbe had instructed, continued through to its conclusion, and everybody remained mystified to understand why all this celebration all of a sudden, and how can we be celebrating and dancing and singing when somebody got hurt? Well, the Rebbe explained that he sensed that something was going to happen to his son, something terrible. And he had prayed and hoped to change that. But he knew that the most powerful way to change that is through joy. Joy, which breaks down the barriers. Joy, as the Talmud tells us, breaks down every obstruction. So when we feel joyous, when we feel happy, we see this in human nature, it takes down the barriers between us. It takes down our own restrictions, our own limitations, our own hang-ups. We can suddenly see things differently. We can suddenly see other people more positively and take down the barrier that may have been separating us from closeness to another human being, etc., etc. We see this in real life all the time. Joy opens a person up. That's why the Talmud says joy breaks down the barriers. Well, it turns out that our joy also breaks down God's barriers, and situations where there's negativity and it's perhaps destined from God, joy can open the door and break down and change that. And that's exactly what the second Rebbe did in this instance. And we see this in a bit of a different sense in the Zohar. We touched upon this last week, but the Zohar tells us something very powerful. Let's read it. This is the second volume of Zohar, Tachazi, which means come and observe. Our world is always ready to receive the spiritual flow that emanates from above. Of course, the Zohar is written in Kabbalistic terminology, but in other words, our world is ready for good energy and good results. The upper world provides in accordance with the state below. So we're able to receive that. But that happening corresponds to what's happening down here. The energy from the more spiritual place reacts to the state below. If the state below is joyous, then correspondingly abundance flows from above. However, if the state below is one of sadness, then correspondingly the flow of blessings is constricted. So we all see this in life. When somebody is joyful, they're more open, they're more expansive, they're more connected, they're more broad, breaking down the barriers. When somebody is sad and dejected, they're clamped in, toned down, restricted, and inward. Well, the Zohar says God is always ready to give us good. There's always good blessing available for us in a higher spiritual place. But it's reacting to what we are doing and reacting to our situation. And when we present sadness and constriction and limitation, we cause that, heaven forbid, above. But when we present joy and good energy, we draw down that good energy. The Rebbe himself had such a story in 1977, when the Rebbe, who was then 75 years old, suffered a heart attack on Simchas Torah during the celebration. Well, he insisted that the celebration continue, first concluding his own dance, and then after he had left the synagogue and they were waiting for treatment, insisting that the Hasidim continue to dance and celebrate as was the custom on Simchas Torah, and later explaining that this dancing and this singing and this celebration, this joy would bring about the cure as it ultimately did. As a final thought, we should touch upon what the Rebbe said about the power of joy, not only as we discussed so far, to see the world positively, not only as we discussed today, but to be a positive energy and motivator and driving force. But actually, as we discover the power of joy to actually bring about the coming of the Mashiach and a better time, a time of happiness and goodness for all. Well, how does joy bring about the coming of the Mashiach? So the Rebbe once explained this with an interesting anecdote, a story from a great rabbi in his childhood. And the child wanted an apple, which must have been the delicacy available at the time. And his father wasn't exactly about to give him the apple. Well, the child had a flash of inspiration and a great idea, and he said, I'm going to say the blessing for the apple. So, of course, every item we eat, we make the blessing beforehand. For an apple, we would say, Baruch Atah, in God's name, Elokeinu melech haolam, Borei pri ha'etz, blessed is the God who created the fruits of the tree, thanking God before we eat that apple. Now, the rule is, the halakha rules, that one may not make a blessing in vain. So we only make that blessing if we're actually going to eat the apple. And saying the blessing without eating an apple is considered inappropriate and actually very negative. To just pronounce God's name and say that blessing in vain just into the air. So the boy went ahead and made the blessing, forcing his father, as it were, to give him the apple so that the blessing should be for something and not be in vain, so the blessing can be saved, as it were. So the Rebbe said, if we begin to celebrate now, in our faith and trust and belief that the Moshiach is coming soon and the better times are ahead, we begin to celebrate now, we almost, in a sense, force God to bring that joy, to bring that celebration, to bring that good energy already now to us here today. So as we conclude our discussion of joy and discussion of positive energy and discussion of the positivity bias that we learned from the Rebbe to incorporate in our lives, we should remember the power of not only being positive, but the power of joy and the power of faith, the power that our happiness and good, positive, joyous energy today have for us today, for changing the circumstances up ahead, and for bringing about the coming of the Moshiach, may it be very soon. Any questions before we conclude? Any questions, any comments?
Very needed discussion.
Thank you. So I will just bring up a little image here, if I can find it. And that is, where did it go? Here. All right. This is the program, a joint Chabad program, taking place tomorrow evening. As you see, 7 talks, each of them only 10 minutes. So we got to maximize the power of those 10 minutes and that into 7 power talks, just in time for Shavuot, which will begin Thursday evening. So Thursday evening, we will not have a class because it will be Shavuot. We will continue next week with other classes as I will be sending out the information. But before Shavuot actually comes, that means tomorrow at 8 o'clock this same time, we will have this program. And as you see, I'll be the last speaker at 9 o'clock talking about why didn't God just write it all down? What is the benefit of the oral law? Why is part of the Torah written, part of it not written? What does that mean for us? So actually for this, to get into the Zoom meeting, all you do is go to 7talks.com. If you go there right now, you actually can't get in because the Zoom meeting did not begin. But tomorrow evening, 7talks.com will take you directly into the meeting. You will be able to see and enjoy all of these great discussions on the current issues and on Shavuot. So I hope to see you all there. And in the meantime, have a wonderful evening and a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Bye.
Bye.